Hi everyone, welcome back to the Arsenal Pass YouTube channel. It's Hayden here, and today I've got a Rhinar Reckless Rampage deck tech for you. This is a hero that is pretty near and dear to my heart. It's probably been, if not my favorite, then one of my favorite heroes in Wraith throughout the entire, lifespan of Flesh and Blood so far. It's a hero that I've spent time with in Welcome to Wraith, with the Crucible meta, then into the Tales of Aria meta, and that's kind of where the journey for me with Rhinar really picked up again, was the start of Tales of Aria meta. As a group, as a testing group, it's a hero that we really identified early on as something that was going to be pretty strong into a meta that was, with Chain falling away, becoming a little bit more mid-rangey after the Seeds ban. You had the printing of Old Time. Guardian looked like it was in a phenomenal spot, just across Old Time and Bravo. And Rhinar was really a hero that we looked at as something that could combat these mid-range decks, potential control decks. And these decks that really wanted to set up big, sort of 5-card hands and in-game strategies, with the Intimidate mechanic being so strong against these types of, plans. So that's kind of where we fell with Rhinar. And initially when my national championships was scheduled for November, Rhinar was a deck that I was looking to play. It was the hero that I was really keen to work on and play. So we spent a lot of time on Rhinar and Classic Constructed as a deck to play, as something I was looking to take to nationals. With nationals being postponed to January, and of course the meta developing, Lightning Briar becoming really prevalent in the meta, and the meta just speeding up in general, it is something that I'm probably now, in fact I am walking away from this for my national championship. But in saying that, we're in a really interesting spot right now. We're in a time where there's 2 national championships left in the season. For most of the world, North America and Europe, the season's done. And we're walking into a spot where we've probably got a month of play before Everfest. And if you're sitting in a meta where people are really targeting Briar with the likes of Old Time, with the likes of Viscera, with, these defensive decks or these control decks, like obviously Oldham is a fantastic option. Even we're seeing Bravo see play. So Rhinar is in a good spot against those decks, I think. And as we move through into Everfest, we don't know what we're going to get. I really hope and I feel like we're going to see the format start to shift a little bit and some cards be printed that are going to help combat something like, Lightning Briar. And that potentially puts Rhinar in an even better spot for those, that developing meta. While it's not something that I feel like I could take right now to a high-level event due to, just the prevalence I think we're going to see of Lightning Briar, as much as I'd love to and as much time as I've spent on it, and we are going to talk about plans into Lightning Briar because there are plans that you can implement. The deck for me is a to be continued, I think. But the time spent on it and the sort of love I have for Rhinar, I really wanted to share this deck with you. So we are going to go over it. We're going to talk about some of the key plans. This is, in its essence, really, it's a 2-pronged sort of strategy, but it really depends on what matchup you're playing into as to how you play this deck. But it has a Mandible Claws plan, and it also has a club plan, a Romping Club plan. And we're going to go through that. We're going to go through the main deck, and we're going to go through the sideboard. But let's get into it. So here we are with the main core of the deck sitting in front of us. This is a 48-card Rhinar core. And if you've ever played Rhinar or seen it in, basically ever since the Crucible of War meta, you're going to be pretty familiar with this core of this deck. It hasn't changed too much. In terms of our resource side on the right to left here, we play with minimum sort of 15 blue cards, and you'll see we do have some others in the sideboard, which we'll get to, but these are the 13 that we're always playing with, and we can go up to 17 for certain matchups where the resources are really needed, but we'll get through that as we talk through sort of some of the sideboard options and matchups. In terms of the cards, the only card that is a little bit different is we play Savage Feast. I'm a big fan of Savage Feast because it allows you to set up these 5-card hands where sometimes you might not have the red Savage Feast you need, and this is a really good enabling card. Discards a card which sets up your Mandible Claws, so great when you Sandsketch plan, or when you Scab Skin, or even when you just start with the Bloodrush Bellows turn, and then you get into having an attack. It's basically another attack in blue that costs 1 that does something that you really need it to do. It draws through a card. Sandsketch Plan, one of the most important cards in the deck, and I think really underrated in Brute and underutilized. This is one of the cards that can really set up those 5-card hands, or if you're on a Mandible Claws plan, and if you're on a club plan, a Romping Club plan, then this is something that's going to get you 2 actions. It's often hard to go a little bit wider when you've got the Romping Club as opposed to the Mandible Claws. It won't work off Bloodrush Bellows turns. But you start with Bloodrush Bellows in Arsenal, you have on your turn a Sandsketch plan, you're kind of off to the races, right? You start to be able to put together 2 attacks with the club plan. Mandible Claws allows you to do that just off 1 discard, but how do you get the extra action points to even start that if it's not a Bloodrush Bellows turn? Sandsketch Plan is a great way to do that. So a card that has a lot of effect for us. Otherwise, we're always playing 1 Reckless Swing. We have access to others in the sideboard. From our yellows kind of perspective here, you'll notice that's the core of our deck, as it should be with any Brute deck. That's going to pay for our Mandible Claws, it's going to pay for our club, it's going to pay for a lot of our power cards that we might want to play in the mid-game, like a Command and Conquer turn. And they also trade off the fact that they have 6 power, they have resources, they defend for 3, and they often have effects that work for us. So that's really where these cards kind of sit. Like, we're happy to play a Smash Instinct on the end of a chain after we Blood Rush Bellows, or we go through if we have to. Or even, Barraging Bighorn is a card that I think is underutilized often. That card, forces out 2 blocks, or it's going to continue on the chain with Mandible Claws, as long as you have something like, a blue or whatever it might be. So this yellow package, again, pretty standard. We are playing in the main core here, 29 6 attacks, but we're going up to almost 34, 35 in every single matchup. That's kind of where I feel like minimum you want to be. Is you never want to be under 30. I think that's just a deck that relies on discarding 6 attacks. That's just putting variance into your side of the board, which is something that I think you want to minimize as much as possible when playing Rhinar. Minimize that variance. So we're playing around 34, 35, up to 36 in some matchups, and we have access to more and different options in the sideboard, which we'll go over. And then now reds. So yeah, smallest part of the deck, but we do have options that come in depending on what we're doing. All 6 attacks apart from our Barraging Beatdown. Of course, Barraging Beatdown, that's one of the core plans once we get around our Romping Club. And just to explain that a little bit further, so one of the kind of sideboard plans I guess we have with this, if we're not on a main sort of Mandible Claws aggressive plan, is that we're getting the Romping Club in. And one of the kind of key game, patterns of gameplay you're going for there is often defending with 2 cards, coming back in with a Barraging Beatdown, red, yellow, plus the club. Pushing through 7 or 8 damage, or taking 2 cards from the opponent and you're trading 2 cards. That's around, if you look at it from a red perspective, you're coming in for 8, blocking for 2 lots of 3. That's a 14 damage sort of swing, when an average hand is trading 12. So really good for trading damage and doing a lot of things in the mid game. And then, into the in game, you've got a bit more sort of explosiveness with some of you like Blood Rush Bellows turns, or you play multiple Barraging Beatdowns, and Alpha Rampage, which is sitting currently in the sideboard. Some matchups we don't play that card because of its on-rate effects. But that's the core of the deck. That's 48 cards. We're always bringing in 12 cards. Basically, no matchup am I playing more than 60. I think there's 2 matchups I play more than 60, and that really comes down to the ability to get back cards like Blood Rush Bellows, and we have Remembrance in the sideboard. So, yeah, otherwise, in terms of, I guess, the game plan and our main deck from an equipment and weapons perspective, we play the Mandible Claws. This is, at its core, a Mandible Claws deck with access to a Romping Club plan. So in most matchups, we are playing Mandible Claws. We are being on the front foot. And that's really important, I think, in a meta where, you're really trying to target, as this deck is, things like Old Time, other mid-range decks, Bravo, Viscera even. So, and even Chain, I think you want to be on the Mandible Claws. So that's really where this sits. And then from an equipment standpoint, one thing you'll notice is that we're playing the Gambler's Gloves as kind of core and standard. And one of the things with Rhinar is that, yes, there is some inbuilt RNG. Every hero has variance to a degree, whether it be, the way your combination of cards come together, how impactful your deck is when you draw cards. And one of the great things about Rhinar, right, is all these cards here, all these 6 attacks, the yellow, are all interchangeable. Doesn't matter which one you draw with your Blood Rush Bellows. Doesn't matter which one you play on the end of a chain most of the time. They're really interchangeable cards. Other decks don't have that, right? They don't have those abilities. We have 9 copies of Barraging Beatdown, which is a great card for us. We have a bunch of red cards that have similar effects and push damage. We have Mandible Claws that can be really consistent for us when we can get them going. So, we reduce variance in that spot, but we have this opportunity with something like a Scabskin Leathers to potentially bring variance into it, or a card like Pulping, which we do play in our sideboard, which brings some variance into it with the draw and discard. And as much as I think that Scabskin Leathers you don't want to roll whenever you don't need to, you only want to roll this for strategic purposes, when your back's against the wall, when it's a free roll, things like that, or you're in such a bad position that the way back into your game is Scabskin Leathers. That's when you want to use the Scabskin Leathers most of the time, when the return is high and the risk is low. But in saying that, Gambler's Gloves allows us to do this with lower variance. And why not take a powerful... Scabskin Leathers, in its essence, is a really powerful piece of equipment, one of the most powerful. And we have another piece of equipment here that can come alongside it that reduces the variance of that powerful effect. So we play it. I don't think there's any reason not to. In some matchups, there's arguments to play something like a Goliath Gauntlets, where you're basically never going to roll the Scabskin Leathers. But I think that's very few and far between, and using up a slot is really tough. This deck is really tight. But I wouldn't begrudge anyone for deciding to play the Goliath Gauntlets into certain matchups, especially with cards like Command and Conquer. I think is really important. Yeah, I think with that, next we're going to talk about the sideboard options in this Rhinar build. As I say, 48 card main deck, and then we have access to this great suite of options in our sideboard. 12 cards in, come up to 60 each time, plus a piece of equipment and another weapon, which we talked about the Romping Club. And as I talk through this, then I'm going to move on to some of the key game patterns, some of the plans that you want to enact with this deck, depending on which matchups you're playing into and how you're playing the deck. First of all, let's get into just kind of the packages that we do have here on the sideboard. So we have access to, 8 more 6+ red attacks, and these come in for different reasons. So Pulping, I think, is a fantastic card to enable Mandible Claws. I think it's a really powerful effect that you can have. So you can basically have this ability to push big turns of damage. But Pulping's really, really average into defense reactions, right? Where they're just going to stop you in your tracks. You're left with wasted resources because they're able to defend with 2 cards. Defense reaction from Arsenal plus a card from hand. And that's really going to put Pulping down. So in certain matchups, we just don't play Pulping into it because the risk is too high. So other than that, Alpha Rampage, this is a fantastic card into mid-range control combo style decks because the effect of like double Intimidate is just such a powerful effect, right? But into aggressive decks that don't want to defend, this card becomes pretty average on rate, right? You trade a blue card to pay for it, the card itself, and then a card to discard. So 3 cards for 9 damage. So the rate on it's really bad if your opponent actually doesn't want to defend it. Whereas, versus those control decks or mid-range decks or combo decks that are trying to use defense reactions or trying to use their hands somewhat for defensive purposes, somewhat for offensive purposes, fantastic card in Alpha Rampage. Pack Hunt. Pack Hunt allows us to have another effect that's a 6 attack that intimidates and supplements some of these plans. So we're often bringing in like 1-2 Pack Hunt in different matchups where we're bringing in, less Alpha Rampage, less Pulping. We're always bringing in some number of these. It just depends. Then we move on to a defensive package. So we have 6 0-cost defense reactions. I think these are just really important, of course, for the aggressive meta that we sit in right now. You want to have access to some number of these. We play 5 to 6 in any of those matchups. Sometimes we're not playing the third Fate for Scene, just because we just don't want to be drawing multiple red defense reactions that are going to stop our offensive plan. And there are some matchups where we do need to be offensive. We just can't be defensive enough, Lightning Briar, for instance. So that's why. And then other than that, we've got these unmovable. This is really for the Guardians, to be honest. This is optional, I think. These cards are kind of ones that if I wasn't expecting Old Time and Bravo, then I probably wouldn't be playing these. But if I am, I think these are really crucial to that matchup. Dorinthia as well to an extent, although of course we see less Dorinthia now. Who knows what we'll see with FFS though. So this is definitely a flex slot, I think, these 3 unmovables. But I've always played, I've actually always played at least 1 unmovable. I like yellow unmovable because you can pitch it early and bring it back late game. And our deck really runs on yellow line pitch cards. And then we've got the Tome of Fiendals. So this is kind of one of the ways that we're trying to attack the aggressive format. And the reason, of course, that we play the Gambler's Gloves and we're really trying to utilize these Scabskin Leathers or the Sand Sketch plan. Tome of Fiendal is a really powerful card when you're being offensive, and the life that you gain matters. So when we have the ability to have multiple action points, and we can play a Tome of Fiendal from Arsenal, draw up to 5 cards or 6 cards if we tunic the tome, gain 5 to 6 life, and then we also push back damage, it's actually perfect for what we're trying to do with Intimidate, where we're trying to say to our opponent, okay, well, we're going to intimidate some to all of your hand and make it really difficult for you to defend. At the same time, I've gained back life because I'm probably taking hits, we're not defending as much, and we're making sure that the life of Tome of Fiendal is really relevant. If the life of Tome of Fiendal isn't relevant because you're not coming in with, offensive power afterwards, so say we, opponent passes the turn to us, we have 4 cards in hand, we just tank some damage to keep 4 cards in hand, we Tome of Fiendal and gain 5 to 6 life, but then we don't do anything with those cards in hand. Well, we're better off just defending and then coming in with an attack on our turn. So we always make sure that, we play this and we gain the life and we make use of the hand afterwards. And that's why, Sandsiege plan and Scabskin Leathers are so important in this deck. Also, the reason we only play 2. You can play 3 to make sure that you do draw 1, but usually the second one is kind of wasted. Defends for 2, and it's really awkward to play. So while we play 2, but if you can get this early into Arsenal, it's one of the ways that you can actually beat Lightning Briar in this format is you get one of these early and then you start to push damage. You block their really relevant plunder run turns, and then you're pushing damage the other way with barrage and beatdowns, big Tome of Fiendal turns, and Bloodrush Bellows turns. Remembrance, so this is coming in against those control decks, making sure that we can get back the Bloodrush Bellows or the Alpha Rampages or the barrage and beatdowns for late game, and push that final big turn that we might need. And then we have our 4 other resource cards we have access to. 3 potions. I love potions in Rhinar. I think they're fantastic into those slower matchups. They allow you to set up, but we make sure that we don't need to play these in the main deck. We're usually always playing 1 energy potion because of just the power of turn 1 energy potion, or even just getting it on the end of a chain after Mandible Claws. It also allows you to set up big turns. And also, to be honest, just can't fit another blue. We'd be taking out a potion for it, and I like to play those 3 potions. And I think you're always going to be wanting to keep a card in hand, so keeping 1 potion is kind of okay. It's not ideal, but it's fine. And then a second copy of Reckless Swing, which is coming in and sort of, most of those aggressive and mid-range matchups, just not our control matchups. So that's the sideboard. The one thing we haven't talked about, piece of equipment-wise, we have a Nulrune Hood. This is for Viserai. I think that deck is becoming more prevalent and is a matchup that I think you're pretty good into. They're going to have to play in a more of a tempo style plan because if they play like that sort of OTK combo style, you just blow them out with your intimidates, and they never get to use their cards defensively, and their hands just become awkward. So they have to play a kind of tempo plan. So we bring in the Nulrune Hood. We basically just prevent a lot of those rune chants, block up their key attacks, and we just come in with good efficient attacks with pack hunts and command and conquers. And then when we do find that big turn, we tank it, and then we Blood Rush Bellows them and blow them out for 24 damage and make sure that their hand is only used for offensive purposes. They won't be able to use it defensively, so really important. I want to talk about some of the game plans with this deck. So we're going to move through. I'm going to lay out some of the key cards and talk about game plans. And then I have one little thing at the end I do want to talk about, which is around the Lightning Briar meta and a bit of an option that you can play to change this deck up a little bit if you do want to play this right now into a Lightning Briar meta and you have a lot of Lightning Briar at your local scene. So before I close out this deck tech on Rhinar, one of the things I really want to talk about, and something a little bit different to what we usually do, is I've laid out some cards here, and these are kind of showcasing some hands or some common play patterns that I'm sort of using with this deck and things that I really like to do, and some of my favorite hands actually. So I want to talk about those, and then I just want to end with some like sort of tips and tricks with playing Rhinar, be it in this meta and into future metas. But some of these hands, okay, so with the club plan, often what you're trying to do, as I say, is keep a 2-card hand, something like a Barrage and Beatdown and a yellow. We play a lot of yellows, of course. It could be a blue. And you're playing this Barrage and Beatdown, you're pitching and you come with Romping Club, either taking 2 cards from your more aggressive opponent who really doesn't want to defend, but you really want them to defend, or they're taking 8 damage, 7 damage with a yellow. Perfect. Often, we'll see things like we're trying to stick defense reactions into Arsenal into those matchups. We're defending out with 2 cards in our hands. So, often I love something like this, where I've, defended with 2 cards to stop an on-hit effect, kept a defense reaction hand, or I've used it, doesn't matter. Next turn, we're arsenaling it and we're coming in. Another quite common play pattern with the Tome of Fiendel plan is something like this, where we're coming in with, it could be a pulping, to be honest, doesn't need to be an alpha rampage, but these red attacks that pay off the fact that we draw more cards, because of course, if we're probably going to have 2 actions, one's being used on Tome, we only get 1 more action. So, and we haven't discarded a card, so the Mandible Claws aren't going to get go again. But we can also, with pulping, of course, discard a card and have go again. So Alpha Rampage does a similar job, just a pure output. But we're making sure we draw into some amount of cards. We're playing something like a Barrage and Beatdown, maybe, if we're lucky enough to find one, if we've already set one up. And then we're coming in with something like an Alpha Rampage and, pushing, 13, 14 damage, 12, 13, 14 damage, plus gaining that life back, usually sort of 3, 4, 5 life. So, we're looking at like an 18-point sort of swing on the turn, which is really important for how we gain back some of those chunks of life and push damage against something like Lightning Briar. If we try and trade like 12 to 14 damage turns, it's not really good enough. We need something that's going to swing it, and gaining life is something that can swing that back. Another sort of key hand, and this is really core to our Mandible Claw sort of main game plan into most of the rest of the field. Usually looks something like, pitch a blue, play a Blood Rush Bellows. Maybe we have something like a Savage Feast in Arsenal. Either hit a card, could be something, if we're lucky, if we've set it up well, Beast Within, fantastic, get an extra card. Might not be though, could just be another yellow or a red attack action for 6. Coming in with the Mandible Claws, and then we're, something ideally like finishing out with a Savage Feast, discarding a Massacre would be a fantastic ending for us. Gets us up to 8, Intimidate the last card if they've kept it, draw us another card to Arsenal. But this could also just be, a Pack Hunt or something similar, and really allows us to push some big sort of damage turns. Again, we're looking at 2 Mandible Claws, 10 damage. We're looking at another plus, 8 on 10 to that. We're looking at 18 damage turns, which is really where we want to be minimum with our Blood Rush Bellows turns. And this is often what it can kind of look like. Again, you could replace these 2 cards with anything, but just a bit of a showcase of what that looks like. I really like to put Blood Rush Bellows into my arsenal as much as possible and find the best hands I can. And what I'm doing is I'm looking at 5-card hands and thinking, how much is this likely going to put on, depending on what I draw? And the average of what I'm going to draw is probably a yellow and a red in most matchups, or a yellow and a blue. And if I don't have another threat in my hand, drawing a yellow and a blue might be bad. But if I've got another threat in my hand, that could be good. And it's also going to depend on what I've already played during the game. How many reds have I already played out? How many blues have I already played and pitched? So that's why I'm looking to set up, often specific 5-card hands, depending on the matchup. Sometimes I'm okay just with pushing damage. 10 off the Mandible Claw and then play a Smash Instinct on the end of the chain is perfect as well. So, and just lastly, I want to talk about some of the kind of key factors of this deck and little tips and tricks in some of the matchups. Winter Scabskin, talked about this earlier. Really, Scabskin is often a fallback. It's an opportunity to really get you back on level playing field if you need to. Often this deck doesn't need to. You've got so many ways to push damage. You've got so many ways to activate Mandible Claws. you've got Sandsketch Plans, you've got Pulpings, you've got all these effects. You've just got the ability to just trade damage. Barrage and Beatdown plus an attack. Just play an attack out for 3, defend with 2 cards. This deck trades really well and then finds good 5-card hands. Where you do need to be more aggressive with Scabskin Leathers is often the aggressive matchups. And that's why we have the Gambler's Gloves. Be really aggressive at the start, Gambler's Gloves, and then, hopefully you've pushed enough damage and you have to pull back and try and find, a turn that's going to win you the game. And that's kind of how you have to play against some of these aggressive decks sometimes. Rhinar just isn't naturally favored into those, so you have to find game plan patterns that can allow you to get a bit of an edge. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You're not going to win every matchup. And that's fine. But into the mid-range decks, you don't need to be doing that. To control decks, you don't need to be doing that. Although into a lot of the control decks, like a Katsu control, when you have this ability to push big hands, often rolling like a 1 on Scabskin Leathers and just passing the turn isn't going to be detrimental to your game, and the upside could be massive. So it's about weighing that up. You want to trade cards early and in the mid game, and you don't want to be trying to set up as many big sort of 5-card hands into mid-range in sort of the early to mid game, because what's going to happen is you're going to intimidate their whole hand. You're going to come in for 18 damage, and then they're going to come back at you for 12 plus damage against something like a Dorinthia, or even maybe something like a Viserai. So you do need to be careful about when you pick your spots for pushing big damage, because often you take a bunch of damage, you take their whole hand, and then they get to come back with it anyway. So Intimidate is really a mechanic that's great at finishing the game, and this deck is really good at trading cards in the mid game, and that's what you kind of need to balance. Bloodrush Bellows is probably the exception for that, because the damage is so high that often you can defend with a card, come with the Bloodrush Bellows turn, keep them with like 2 cards, push a bunch of damage, and you trade off better than that. In terms of matchups, as I say, this deck kind of eats control decks and mid-range decks for breakfast, which is really where this is targeted at, and again why I say that as we come into the FFS meta, I'm really hoping to see Rhinar get a bit of a bump in terms of just the meta that it sits in. I already think the deck is really, really good. It's just where it plays into right now. Last thing I did want to show you before we wrap up is an option that you can play. So, of course, we know how strong Lightning Briar is right now, and of course, if you are sitting in a meta where people are still playing a lot of Lightning Briar, we're seeing less old times and things like that, but you still really want to play Rhinar. First of all, I'd probably say maybe Rhinar isn't the right pick right now, but if you still do really want to play Rhinar, there is kind of a plan you can bring into, and that really harkens back to old Mandible Claw decks, which we used to play, which is really around playing Art of War. So basically what you can do is you can bring in the Art of War. I'd probably say get rid of the Unmovables, if that's the case, and that's the meta you're looking at. Play something like a Savage Swing as an extra red addition into your deck. And basically, you're just playing an aggressive deck. You are playing Art of Wars, which dig you through cards to find your Bloodrush Bellows faster. They also combo well on Bloodrush Bellows turns, and you're just trying to push damage. I think this can get you to somewhere close to 50-50, but it's not, to be honest, it's not something that's going to give you a favorable matchup into Briar. But if you're sitting in a meta that's really, is full of Briar, but you still really want to play Rhinar, then this could be the option for you. So that's kind of what I wanted to end it on, is just an option that you can pick up and edit into the deck. If you are looking for the deck guide for this is going to be up on our Patreon. If you don't know about our Patreon, we put a lot of extra content up on there, deck guides. We put up a monthly Patreon-only podcast, which we usually talk about sort of level ups or in-depth analysis and things like that. And then we also do, for some of our advanced tier patrons, we do a once-a-month session, a deep dive analysis, either on gameplay or on a particular deck or something that's happening in the World of Flesh and Blood. So the link will be down below. The deck list link for this is also down below. And until next time, we'll see you later.